she's never soared before.
Yeah, baby, she bangs, oh baby, when she moves, she moves.
We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
From the liberal wieners
To the right-wing nut jobs,
this land belongs.
this land belongs.
This land belongs to you and me.
Yeah.
And hold on, I gotta go tell her to put her headphones on because she's on the phone. Ma, the meatloaf. What is she doing in there?
It's a real crackerjack operation we got going on here.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
If it's not in frame, it doesn't exist.
I am big. It's the picture that got small.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Uh-huh.
I only eat popcorn at the moment.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
Like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
Really? Worst film you ever saw? Well, my next one will be better. Hello? Hello?
You want to see it again?
Can we?
And just like the movies, we play out our last.
You are listening to the History on Film podcast. And now here are your hosts, Ross Lennon and Ryan Barr.
Hello, and welcome to another interview edition of the History on Film podcast. I'm your host, Ross Lennon. I'm joined, as always, by my close friend and colleague, Ryan Barr. How you doing, Ryan?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited about today's guest. It's a topic that has some both cultural relevance and some personal relevance to actually the two of us. So we'll get into that. But no, I'm doing good. I'm excited today.
So this is our first filmmaker guest. We've talked to a lot of authors. This is our first filmmaker. We are talking to filmmaker Chris Bell. He is the director of the documentary series Miss Me Yet, available on Means TV. Chris, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to set you up to introduce yourself and introduce the series.
Okay, so I'm a filmmaker in the New York, New Jersey area, and I work on a very low money level, micro budget. So one of the projects that we're here to talk about is Miss Me Yet, which is an all archival documentary about the George W. Bush administration, which was just me stealing a bunch of footage and recontextualizing it. George W. Bush appearances, his speeches, address to the nation, cut together with commercials of the time, different pop cultures, clips from TV shows, that kind of thing. And I go year by year per episode until the last episode where I bring us to present day.
And so how did this project come to be? What got you thinking in that mindset? And then where were you during the Bush years?
I got the idea around 2015. It was George W. Bush rehab in full swing, sharing candy with Michelle Obama. We all remember, we know it well. And I thought it would be funny if someone made a movie where it began at the first year of the Bush admin, 9/11, all that stuff. And the end of the movie would be him on Ellen. And in between, you have the Iraq War, you have Katrina, you have mass death, all these terrible things, and then the little button at the end would be him on Ellen, which really intrigued me and really amused me, and I kept thinking about it, and it's one of those things where I'm thinking about it so much, and it's like, God, I gotta do it, huh? So, cut to whenever it came out, 2021, I believe it came out, and I kind of worked on it the whole time until it came out. I think the last bit of footage I had put in was in August, and it came out on 9/11. So I was doing it for a very long time because it didn't cost anything. It was a cool little side project kind of thing that if I was writing or just trying to save up money, this costs nothing and I can kind of do it whenever. And I didn't really need anybody. It was just me. And when I needed someone, would be like, watch this. Does this make sense? Too confusing? That kind of thing. But I can kind of hole up and work on it whenever I could. And where was I during the Bush years? I was in high school and college. So the first time I voted was against, believe it or not, George W. Bush for the second term, and it didn't work out. But that's where I was. I was in high school. I was in the punk scene, so I knew he was bad. I didn't know why.
Did you rock against him?
In theory, I was a big Blink 182 fan, and I still am. So I really liked that Tom was for John Kerry and No Effects and all of those bands. Yeah, they kind of set me on a decent path. I didn't know why, and I didn't know what I was really. I guess I thought the truth was in the middle, centrist. And eventually I would just, I think the Iraq War and 9/11 and kind of understanding that there's a world outside of America that had different opinions and what are those, and everyone who's talking on the television, none of that really makes sense. So I was very interested in learning about international politics and our relationship to other countries as an empire, imperialism, what that means. And look at me now. Certainly not any happier, but yeah, that was a big moment. I was growing up and kind of thinking about things and needing answers. And yeah, and I went back to the well.
Yeah, you just reminded me of how Ross and I were both a little bit younger than you, but both high school into college during those years too. And while it wasn't as, I would say, not as like in the 60s and 70s, like protest music and stuff, but I remember there was a bit of a resurgence in the Bush years of it was mostly like the pop, the skater scene, the pop punk scene, the punk scene that was like writing some protest music and kind of being, hey, we're not jiving with like this American imperialism. You just kind of reminded me, like I had forgotten all that. And then you said No Effects, and I was like, oh yeah, they were a band. I forgot they existed actually. So yeah, no, it was there was definitely that undercurrent those years of kind of like that Vans Warped Tour skater scene, pop punk scene that was getting the kids, us, and we were the kids, kind of thinking about different things politically.
I do such low effort, like copy paste for the episode art, but I'm gonna have to try to get like the Rock Against Bush, but like
The
edit
Bush
our
things,
logo.
yeah.
Yeah.
I hate to break your heart a little bit, Ryan, but NoFX just played their last show this year. So
Did they?
yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
You're too late.
I remember there was a girl in high school that I was really into her and like she was really into them. So I think that's why I was aware of them. Otherwise, that I was not their target demo, but that's okay. I think the reason I got into Jimmy Eat World, there was a girl I had a crush on that was like really into Jimmy Eat World. So I had to get really into Jimmy Eat World. I was pathetic in high school. That's neither. That's a whole different episode though.
Yeah. We'll talk about how pathetic we were in high school later, when we get to the Carrie reporting for duty watch parties.
Yeah.
I never looked around, never second guessed. Then I read some Howard Zinn. Now I'm always depressed, and now I can't sleep from years of apathy. All because I read a little Noam Chomsky. I'm eating vegetation cause of fast food nation. I wear a couple of shoes cause of globalization. I'm watching Michael Moore expose the awful truth. I'm listening to Public Enemy and Reagan Youth. I see no world peace cause of zealous armed forces. I eat no breath mints cause I'm from the hooked horses. Now I can't believe what an absolute failure. The president's laughing cause he voted for Nader.
What's so interesting to me though is like kind of moving into the meat of this is like, so we're recording this, I think 2 or 3 days after the 25th anniversary of the battle in Seattle. And I do think that watching your first 2 episodes and like the, fallout of the election and everything that went along with that. And then just really pre 9/11, I think a lot of that energy around the WTO sort of did coalesce around like opposing the election, like the 2000 election. And then it seems like 9/11 just sucked all of the air out of the room. Did you kind of like when you were going through the early, like year one of Bush, did you see a lot of that energy translated in? Is that I don't know, like to me, seeing the early response to the election, it's like it triggered a memory in my head, but it's like it had a sort of like organizational tenor to it that really seemed to fall apart, in like 2002.
Yeah, it's hard to say because there was obviously big WTO protests and there was a negative response to him actually getting into the seat of power. But there were big demonstrations after 9/11 against the Iraq War, which were not covered. So it's
Mhm.
hard to say, and I know they were big, but it's hard to say if things fell apart. I mean, I guess I would say no, it didn't dissipate after 9/11 because of the Iraq War protests. But after them, certainly. That's when there was a big air of defeat. The WTO protests were, I don't know, maybe you can argue somewhat successful in some way, but I think the Iraq War protest was big time defeat for obvious reasons and very dispiriting. And then I don't think you really see anything until probably the Obama campaign, and we know how that went.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was in the Obama for America Sadhu car, and then I was asked to lay down my sword, and I was not happy about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he organized pretty well for that campaign and then let it
Mhm.
completely dissipate
Yeah.
for whatever reason. We
Now we're
could
gonna
think
let the
about it.
Clinton people take over.
Yeah.
You know the rule. We can't make fun of the Clintons because
Hmm.
Oh, we can't? You should have told me.
I mean, we can, but I always check under my car after every episode. So
That's how this show becomes famous, is us two mooks get wiped out.
I mean, I mean, not for nothing, but with the the current incoming administration, I'm already on a couple of lists. I know I might be going away for a while. I'm going away to camp,
Yeah, I
you
was I
guys. So
was some of
just
that. I was one of those $37 to Bernie, so I just assume, like I might as well be mailing guns to the Zapatistas at this point. Like,
well, you have to remember,
Oh, yeah.
I was chair of the Young Republicans in my town until March of 2016 when Trump became the nominee. So, you know, I'm I'm on like I said multiple lists, and I'm going to go away to camp. It'll be fun.
so one of the things, and I think this kind of ties in, like connecting with the protests and sort of, I'm trying to figure out because so much of this does either rhyme with the current moment or is for people who may not have been familiar, who were not engaged at the time or were not, alive at the time. I think a lot of this does resonate with the current moment, but then I do think the big difference is the role of the monoculture and like what we think of as like the traditional media gatekeepers just having more, like being able to exert more power then than now. I mean, obviously the internet existed, in 2000, 2002, but it really does feel like a lot of these organic sort of protest movements or, this kind of opposition was like throttled by the media. And so I wonder, like, when you were trying to find clips of resistance to the Bush
Mm.
administration, did it seem like, oh, these are isolated incidents for the most part? Or, like there's the Dixie Chicks and then there's Michael Moore at the Oscars, and it's like those felt at the time sort of like these isolated ruptures. And I think it's just because those were so big that they broke through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. having experienced that, nobody really around me liked him or liked what he was doing, except for boring adults. And I can't get that out of my head, that lived experience, and how that paints like what I'm looking at. But yeah, looking for clips, it kind of felt few and far between. And is that the media being like, we don't really touch this stuff? Um, we don't do politics.
Hmm.
But when they did, importantly, or notably, the Dixie Chicks coverage that I use, because they kind of speak out at a concert and it causes this big thing.
We're ashamed the President of the United States is from Texas.
So I have a interview from, I forget what, but it's very interesting because the way that they interview the Dixie Chicks, and they're like, why did you do this? But the way they kind of frame everything is very specific. They set them up. They're like, why did you only said these things? Why did you say it? And before that, they're kind of setting you up for this snippet of the interview. And it's like they're against the Iraq War, even though all of the country is for it. And then you see the clip. And like, what does that do to someone sitting at home? Instead of it being like, I want to know why the Dixie Chicks said that. I want to know why, they felt the need to break the performer audience boundary and go there. I want to know why it was important for them to do that. But instead, they do the kind of, what is it, Edward Herman Chomsky, like manufacturing consent. And it's just like, well, this is what it means. Here are the facts. We're not going to cite these facts. We're not going to like tell you exactly like how we got there. This is here. And now you're going into the clip. And the way they edit it is a little like she is a little awkward about it, a little embarrassed, doesn't, not very verbose. She's not ready to argue. I think she's pretty sincere and didn't realize it would be this crazy thing, but it's a very interesting clip. Like that's how they handled it. They were shutting it down on multiple fronts. They were getting you ready, being like, here's some info why she's wrong, and we're going to get into it. And it doesn't really feel particularly mean unless you know what to look for.
But of course, the soldiers on everyone's mind that night were the men and women poised to invade Iraq. At home, the UN was divided in heated argument. Demonstrators were in the streets from London to San Francisco, even though 70% of Americans were clear that the protesters were wrong and it was time to go to war.
We don't plan things that we're going to say, and sometimes it backfires, not this big, but in the long run, we always feel like it makes the show fresher and more genuine when things aren't scripted.
Just 15 words, but they were 15 words. Just so you know, we're ashamed. The President of the United States is from Texas. Why did you say it?
Out of frustration. At that moment, on the eve of war, I had a lot of questions that I felt were unanswered.
Believe me, there'll be a lot more on this topic later.
And that was kind of how things were handled. And I remember telling everybody that I was going to film school, that I was going to be in film. People would always say with a smirk, what do you think of Michael Moore? And the honest answers, I always like felt a little, whatever, 50-50. It's like, I generally agreed with him, but is he manipulative? Like, okay, yeah, I guess so. Is that bad? I don't know. But I always felt like when I was asked that question, probably the smirk was a clue that I was being kind of set up for failure or for a potential argument or something like that. And that is basically the answer. Like the media did it like that. If they had dissenting voices, sometimes they were peppered with a little information that would help the viewer along to think the correct thing. You couldn't really question the war. It was very dicey, no matter what you did, because even if you didn't agree with it, there was a few things that they would be able to get you on where it's like, well, American soldiers shouldn't get hurt and die, therefore they have to be there or fight back or something. And then number Two would be like, well, sounds like not really good. So, like, what are you talking about? Those were kind of key points that nobody expected you to argue with, and that would be kind of brought up. But still, you shouldn't bring it up.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember they would try to like thread the needle where like, well, I support the troops, but I don't support the war or something like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
I guess trying to not repeat like Vietnam. I mean, because we know how Vietnam vets were treated, when they came home. But still, I remember them trying to like, it was like square pegs and round hole type of things. Like, well, I support the troops, but I don't support the war. And I'm like, yeah, but if you supported the troops, you wouldn't want them there in the first place. I mean, again, being at that age where like you're kind of coming into your own in the background of the Bush post 9/11 era, being 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 in those years was just wild because you're sitting here looking at adults going, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean? That doesn't make any sense. That's oh, we're too young to understand this nuance. I'm like, that's not nuance. That's just what later we learned, in a post 2016 world, it's just pure cognitive dissonance. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So I have a question about some of the clips you chose, and I was surprised when I watched the series. I guess coming into it, I was expecting. I liked the commercials and the clips from shows juxtaposed with like speeches and more newsreel type of footage, right? Did you ever, other than like with the Dixie Chicks that we just discussed, you didn't use a lot of like interviews or like commentary type shows? You didn't use like anything from like CNN, Crossfire, or anything like that was kind of big at the time. Did you consider using things like that originally, or you wanted it more just like, I guess, pure, no commentary, even from the era, more just pure, what it was, and then let the viewer draw their conclusions?
Yeah, it would be the latter. I didn't want to like really crowd it with stuff like that, even just as a limitation for myself, where, I have to call it at some point. And if I get into this pool, I'm gonna drown. It'll take me forever to get out. But it did seem like something like that would crowd it. And I wanted to have the footage, the different types of footage, be different enough to have a kind of interesting dialogue with each other. And I wasn't sure that talking heads and Fox News, CNN stuff would be different enough, because the culture had to speak to the politics and vice versa. And that might have been, I won't say I'm not on the nose with anything. I don't say I don't do that, but it might be a little too on the nose to do stuff like that. So I was avoiding that when I could. And I did want to be able to, with pop culture, kind of tug at the nostalgia stuff while doing all the other things. And hopefully, if I'm pushing that button, then that I can connect to kind of all the different contradictions that are piling up or whatever. Because normally, a lot of people who have seen this have experienced some of these years at some point, and I wanted to highlight contradictions, and maybe if I hit a few nostalgia buttons, we can interrogate them in interesting ways.
Yeah, the contradictions were what I mean, because I was there. I was watching a lot of TV in high school, especially before you can drive and can work. I mean, what else? What else you got to do? Like the Steve Miller song, sit around the house, get high, and watch the tube. That's kind of what you do at 15 when you can't do anything else. And so I remember, even if they weren't shows, like the commercials, I remembered more that you used than some of the shows. Some of the shows, like American Idol and stuff, I didn't get into, never got into, will never get into. I don't care what kind of institution it became. But what was really jarring to me from being around and being cognizant of those years was almost how dystopian the contradictions were. It reminded me of movies like RoboCop and stuff, where like the shows or like Running Man, RoboCop, those like 80s dystopian films where like the mass media is just totally absurdist. Meanwhile, there's like decay and depravity and violence going on in the streets. And that's kind of what I got from some of these like juxtapositions, some of these contradictions was like, wow, the media, the mass media was kind of tone deaf. It's kind of like everything's great. Look at all the crap over here. Meanwhile, we're sending young men and women off to war where, we have Colin Powell lying to the UN. Like there's all these like, I don't know if sinister is the right word, but they were nasty things going on, which now in retrospect, compared to current environment, they look like all Boy Scouts compared. But that's still, it was so jarring to me, even being alive then. Like, wow, the mass media was kind of trying to distract us and doing their jobs, I guess, trying to distract us from these very serious, very nuanced, very chaotic things going on in the world, whether they were trying to shield us or protect us or distract us. It was that definitely comes across in the clips you chose and how you piece them together and how you kind of pair them up.
What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Get ready to laugh, because the most anticipated new series of the season is next.
Help me!
The New York Post says this is not only must-see TV, but are you kidding? I wouldn't miss it for the world TV.
You're 2 hours late. We're wearing our work outfits.
Good Lord! It's the hilarious premiere of The Simple Life, coming up next on Fox.
And I do think you do a really great job of including a lot of different stuff from the Middle East throughout. I think it would have been, probably easier to just do, sort of like the White House press secretary stuff. And then and then Prison Break, started at 8 and stuff like that. So I do think you do a really good job of, including these voices from, of the people on whom the violence was done, and really sort of humanizing it in a way where a lot of that stuff did not get through, even for people like myself who were, looking for it. And I think that is one of the ways in which this is a really great teaching tool, as well as a, documentary film series. So I think that was a really good choice.
Thank you. It just reminded me of not something I heard, I don't think, in the Bush admin, but definitely during Obama, when you were seeing a lot of terrorist attacks that were definitely highly fueled from Iraq War, post 9/11 shenanigans, let's say. And you would hear very well-meaning liberals, they just want to hear from Muslims who are moderate. They wouldn't agree with that. And where are they? I have no idea. I can't find them, but I wish somebody would say something, And what's interesting about finding that footage, this is stuff I grabbed from AP, is there are people in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they are being interviewed. And some of them are even speaking English, but there are subtitles that they also provide. And this is there, and there are people being like, "This sucks," or "Hey, my son was a DJ at a wedding, and you bombed a wedding." You hear a lot of stuff like that. That was all there, and I was really shocked to see it. And I don't know how much you can blame on the appetite of the viewer. I'm sure the TV stations could easily say that, who wants to actually see this? Even though years later, people are wondering, oh, why are Muslims, why do they hate us? You'd think someone would say something. And the truth is they did, and we didn't see it. And it was very remarkable footage to find. And I actually had too much in. And I had an Iraqi friend watch it, and she was like, "You need to Like, you don't need to put this much in. You could take some out. So I did, I complied, but I really wanted to have that in there. I felt like that definitely needed to be seen amidst all the Bushism junk would be people who actually suffered because of all this and went on to live another day and spoke their mind and all that stuff. That is all huge contradictions to, I think, what most people probably still think today, sadly. But I thought that was probably one of the most important things to include.
Yeah, I thought that inclusion was great because I mean that kind of goes back to the media shielding us. Like, yeah, they weren't showing us those voices. I mean, unless back then you're reading like The Economist or watching Democracy Now, which who remembers that show? I do, but we might be the three, might be the only three people that remember that show. But you weren't hearing those not only contrarian American voices or even contrarian European ally or Asian ally voices, which there were several in France, Japan, and elsewhere. But you weren't hearing the Iraqi side or the Saudi side or any of these other voices in the region that might have something to say about, weddings and, hospitals and children's schools being bombed.
I also think a lot of it is, I think it's interesting because it's like, it is informed by the fact that Vietnam was the first televised war, and there was so much coverage of Vietnam. And I mean, this is really the next major conflict after that. And so I think a lot of it was the media saying like, well, we can't show too much, actual coverage, not because we're incapable, but just because it really does have such an impact on public opinion.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I think the weird part about the whole thing too is that, again, to this day, I still think there's a sizable portion of people who think we went to Iraq because of 9/11, as in they were responsible for the attacks. And I think a huge amount of people do not know and may never be able to come to terms with the fact that this country, which is the people who govern and make huge decisions that affect all of our lives, worked with Osama bin Laden, worked with people like Osama bin Laden, and continue to this very day as remnants of, ISIS, Al Qaeda are in Syria fighting with Israel. Like, these things still happen in the Middle East, and we are still working with them. And I don't think, and these sound like conspiratorial things, and they're not. They make Hollywood movies, Charlie Wilson's War, training fighters to go fight in Afghanistan. These are things, and I really don't think people have it in them to truly understand what that means. And it sucks. It's a shame. I don't really know what that would do if they understood that. I may never know because I think it is a weird thing to sit with and truly fathom.
Right.
And I also think it's one of those things where it's like, so I taught middle school briefly and I taught social studies courses, but a lot of that requires the students to have their reading be at a certain comprehension level. And if they can't read at grade level, then they can't do the work. And so in order to get them to be able to do my work, I first have to work up their reading comprehension. And I think that it's sort of similar in trying to explain to people like, well, in order to understand what's happening in the Middle East now or 20 years ago, you have to understand what happened 70 years ago or, 90 years ago or 2000 years, like there is so much backlog that you have to get through, to kind of explain like, well, here's why, we don't have a Kurdistan or this, that, the other, like, and here's why Egypt is such a big deal. Like, I don't know. It just,
It's so funny. It's so funny because, like, I don't know if this is a huge jump, but you said Kurdistan, like Sykes-Picot, like carving up the Middle East, and it's like, okay, this is a country. Like we did that so many places, and it's like I'm thinking about people freaking out in 2020, 3 months in because they couldn't dye their hair. You would think they would get it to be like, oh, imagine like they just said this is where you live now, and this is like the country, and this is how you're governed. Like the people who couldn't go out to Applebee's might understand why that might have ramifications decades later. Not to say I wasn't stir crazy during COVID either, but if I had to dye my hair, I could wait. And I know that the Middle East they have a rough time. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, Charlie Wilson's War. I mean, it takes a lot for me to hate a Tom Hanks movie more than Polar Express, and that movie. Oh my gosh!
I haven't seen it, but they do.
Okay.
I know that they deal with that period of time to some honesty in which like someone could see that movie and be like, oh, we gave who what?
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't seen it. And I have heard that it's, not.
I think the problem is that they cast Tom Hanks. And so it's like you have to combat the idea of like, oh, well, at the end of the day, this rascal is gonna, do the right thing. But it's like if you watch it with any semblance of, like geopolitical history, like, oh, this man is a monster who is also, adulterer and all these other kinds of things. It's like there are no good qualities about him. And he also like caused 9/11. Like, so it's just a terrible movie.
I'm partly surprised they didn't end it like one of the Rambo movies where it's like this is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters. That movie is no, but I saw the same thing when I taught dual enrollment classes. I taught comparative politics dual enrollment for a while, and this was like in 2019, 2020, 2021, and it was one of those things where I started explaining like 9/11 and pre 9/11 versus post 9/11. I realized all my students are like 15, 16. They were born well after 9/11, and like you have to explain. Like they've been growing up in a post 9/11 world, but like trying to explain to them, I felt like such an old man trying to explain to them like, no, it used to be different. The world used to be, and I make the joke all the time, but people are always like, oh, why are millennials and younger Gen Xers all like very angry at the world? And I'm like, maybe because we're all we're all middle school to college age, and we watched 3,000 people die live on TV one afternoon. And nothing's gotten better since. And, there's been little, glimpses of hope, but it hasn't gotten better. And then you start peeling back those historical factors that have led to those moments that have changed the world and have made things gross and worse. And you're like, oh, well, those seeds were planted even before I was born, that there's and then trying to explain it to a 15 or 16-year-old, sophomore in high school that's taken a college level course is very difficult to explain. Well, no, some of this stuff predates even me and my generation and my era. This was stuff that, even predates my parents. My parents were teenagers themselves when some of these seeds were being planted that came to fruition 20, 30, 40 years later. And it's that's why I think documentaries like yours are so important, because they do kind of demonstrate this is what it was like. It's kind of that, it's almost like the C-SPAN effect. This is the unblinking eye. This is not, there's no editorialization, there's no commentary, there's no like what now they do to try to politics. Well, we know Bush said this, but what he meant was no, this is just his speech, his notes, his whatever, and you let the viewer kind of draw their own conclusions, which I think is a great touch. I have a question, Chris. Given kind of now we are 20-something years past the Bush era, which I just threw up in my mouth a little bit saying that, thinking about my own mortality now. But knowing how things have gotten worse and how things have changed, and some of the people we've had in the White House since then, both good, bad, and indifferent, does that change how you reflect on that era, how you feel about the era, because I know how I felt in high school and college about Bush and the Bush era versus how I feel now in my late 30s. Even removing like his whole like rehabilitation and the media out of it, I feel differently about some things. Of course, now we have hindsight. We have, different things that are like, oh, okay, that happened and we didn't understand it then, but now we understand it now type of situations. And then again, reflect, contrasting that with like, he should not, the orange one, and kind of what his administration has done and will do at the time of this recording, or wants to do, I should say. Does that, when you start comparing like one administration to the other, does that start changing your opinion or your outlook, or, does, how does that, and then how does that change for you at a personal level, also as a filmmaker that's trying to present information? How does that kind of work? If anything changes.
I don't really know if I see this any differently. I think I'm hearing a lot of stuff now, which has been calling this the long George W. Bush administration, which means he never left office. And I think what that means is that when 9/11 happened, a lot of things were put into place because of that emergency, which is, let's say, mass surveillance,
warrantless wiretaps,
huge presence in the Middle East that never really wound down, even when it was supposed to.
Drone strikes are now
they're the key. Yeah. Drone strikes are the key.
Airport security is a nightmare.
Airport security, private contractors in lieu of actual military personnel that are in theory accountable. There's a lot of things that didn't really change. And then there's the key thing. There's a few key things, but one of the key things would be the recession that never really recovered, but I don't think there was much of a difference between how Bush handled the recession versus how Obama came in and then handled the recession. Looking at the incoming Trump administration and even the one before it, where there was John Bolton and this, who was a W. Bush hanger-on.
And a recess appointment. We're talking so much about, is Trump going to use recess appointments, for all of these ghouls and sex pests that he wants to bring in? But Bolton was famously, I believe, a recess appointment because they didn't want him in,
right.
What was that, 2005?
I do give John Bolton credit for one thing, though. Once he was part of the first Trump administration, then left and then wanted Trump out of there so bad. You gotta give the man credit. He is committed to regime change no matter where he's at. So that's, he is if anything, he is consistent, and I respect that about him.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. I don't see the world has changed much. I mean, what's good is that when I was confused living during the Bush administration, I thought I was the center, and it's, the truth is in the middle kind of thing. And come to find out I'm actually hardline left wing, and I didn't really know what that meant. I found out what that meant, and now there are things that I could put my time into, such as unionism, let's say. And I had no idea what any of that stuff was. So that, I think, is a bigger thing now, even in the culture, where I can learn about that. If I'm a bit dumber than I am now, I can today learn about that. Whereas back then, I would never know about anything like that. So I think there is a thing. And there's, I'm able to put out work on a worker-owned co-op streaming service. These things exist, and we're all working together, and that was absent. And that's a big change now. I don't think that we're necessarily better off just yet, but I definitely see more things that are worthy to put your time into. Listening to punk bands and stuff, it was like helping me along, but I didn't know what to do other than to go to shows and be like, yeah, like I feel weird too. But I don't know, that was kind of bad. I was also a teenager, we were talking about like, oh, I like this band because a girl liked that band. That was taking up a lot of my brain too.
Yeah.
So there's the older, wiser contingent.
I mean, and that lasted well into my early 30s. I'm not going to lie. Like that's, I'm much wiser now, but yeah. I think, you're absolutely right. Because that's definitely how I feel. It's kind of like 9/11 happened and we've been living, there's been, like I said, some peaks and valleys, but it's pretty been consistent that you hear a lot of historians right now talking about there's like, we're getting ready to, we're right on time for the 80th year, fourth turning cycle type of thing. But I think 9/11 kind of either accelerated that or 9/11 was that moment. And now we're just in that aftermath, kind of like how the Civil War wasn't really the turning. I think it was all the aftermath of the Civil War with, the Johnson administration dropping the ball on Reconstruction and everything like that. That led to Jim Crow and civil rights Voting Rights Act and all these things like that. You can see that on that timeline. It wasn't the Civil War that was the turning. It was everything that came after the Civil War. And I think right now we're in that everything coming after 9/11 Bush era. It's a lot of the same. And yeah, it's a lot of the same people. It's the same. I mean, in a lot of ways, the Bush, the first, Bush's two terms were a lot of repeat of Reagan and his dad's term, of the same Rumsfeld and Cheney and the whole conga line of the neoconservative, 80s movement there. Yeah, I would agree that we are kind of still living in a Bush era that never ended. In a lot of ways. And then in a lot of ways, things have changed because now social media and the internet is so much more robust that we, we have ways to communicate and ways to kind of find those communities that aren't just going to the, Blink-182 show and like, or whoever else and going, yeah, I something's off in the world, but I don't know, but I'm only 16 and, no one's asking me anyway, Blink-182 said no one likes you when you're 23. I felt that both at 15 when I heard that song, 23 when I was 23, and now at 37 going on 38, I still feel no one likes me at 23. So we have ways of finding our community better now, but that also brings into a whole other conversation, a whole different episode about social media and the silos and we're not talking to each other and all that stuff, which but then again, I think about it, we weren't doing that then. I mean, you go back and look at my favorite event from the Bush era is, and that's why I brought up earlier about CNN Crossfire, is when you had Paul Begala, Tucker Carlson on Crossfire, and Jon Stewart comes on and makes fun of them both so much that Tucker Carlson like changes his entire wardrobe. Like to this day, like we're still seeing that, like, Jon Stewart eviscerated him on air so badly, bullied him so badly, the dude stopped wearing bow ties. I think that, to me, but he was saying that then you guys are part of the problem. You guys aren't talking with each other. You're talking at each other, and we're still doing that. We're that was in 2004, 20 years later, and we're still just mostly talking in the political space, talking at each other.
I made a special effort to come on the show today because I have privately amongst my friends and also in occasional newspapers and television shows mentioned this show as being bad. And I felt that wasn't fair and I should come here and tell you that it's not so much that it's bad as it's hurting America. So I wanted to come here today and say,
wait.
Here's just what I wanted to tell you guys.
Yeah.
Stop. Stop hurting America.
Okay, now how do you pay?
The people, not well, but you can sleep at night. See, the thing is, we need your help. Partisan, what do you call it? Hacks.
Wait, John, let me tell you something valuable that I think we do that I'd like to see you do.
Something valuable?
Yeah, no, it's nice when politicians, and I'll tell you, when politicians come on, it's nice to get them to try and answer the question. And in order to do that, we try and ask them pointed questions. I want to contrast our questions with some questions you asked John Kerry recently.
If you want to compare your show to a comedy show, you're more than welcome to.
Here's the point.
If that's your goal,
no, it's not.
I wouldn't aim for us. I'd aim for Seinfeld.
Here's the problem.
That's a very good show.
Kerry won't come on this show. He will come on your show. Let me suggest why he wants to.
Well, we have civilized discourse.
Well, here's
if the indictment is, and I have seen you say this, that Crossfire reduces everything, as I said in the intro, to left, right, black, white.
Yes.
Well, it's because, see, we're a debate show. It's like saying the Weather Channel reduces
that'd be
everything
great.
to a storm front.
I would love to see a debate show.
In a 24-hour day where we have each side on as best we can get them.
No. That would be great.
And have them fight it out.
To do a debate would be great, but that's like saying pro wrestling is a show about athletic competition.
I think you're a good comedian. I think your lectures are boring. Let me ask you a question on the news.
Now, this is theater. I mean, it's obvious. How old are you?
35.
And you wear a bow tie.
Yeah, I do. I do.
So this is.
No, let me just go. No, come on.
And listen, I'm not suggesting that you're not a smart guy, because those are not easy to tie. But the thing is that you're doing theater when you should be doing debate, which would be great.
No, it's just
not
true.
honest. What you do is not honest. What you do is partisan hackery.
And you're accusing us of partisan hackery?
Absolutely.
You've got to be kidding, man.
You're on CNN.
Say,
the show that leads into me is puppets making crank phone calls. What is wrong with you?
Well, something that's so interesting to me, we're talking about like the long Bush years and stuff like that. I think so much of it connects to like this rightward shift in like American popular culture and the American cultural imagination. 24 is a show that I think that was one thing that would serve as like, I don't know, maybe like a skeleton key to unlocking a lot of this kind of stuff, where, like the Bush administration was using 24 as like a justification for torture. And then, like the first season doesn't really, like the first season was novel, but it was about like, was it like white Bosnian separatists or something? It was some sort of weird thing, because I think it was filmed pre 9/11. And then post 9/11, the show takes off, and it's just like the most grim, miserable thing. But I feel like it is the tip of the spear for, like we have the operator culture now, where, like these people are private contractors, and so like they, like they have the aesthetics of, a soldier, but also like, oh, well, I have a beard, I have, my own right-wing coffee company. Like, it just feels like so much of culture has shifted to the right, that I think that happened in part because of 9/11, because of the Bush administration, because of 2004, winning with this, what they called a mandate, just like in 2024. I think the reason why those elections feel so similar is that it was very deflating, to the Democrats and to the broader left, that it was like, oh, well, I guess this is what people really want, even though, you can get into the numbers and say like, oh, well, there was not a mandate, necessarily.
Yeah, he lost polarity or something,
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to do that now with the Trump, and I'm like, that doesn't change the fact he won the Electoral College, and we're all just sitting here waiting, what's going to happen next. And we already know. We already saw this movie once. We know how it ends. Hopefully this time doesn't end with a pandemic. But we got Trump 2 Electric Boogaloo happening in less than a month, and that's not frightening at all.
But I do wonder if, I don't know, maybe if you want to make another one, we could look at this, rightward cultural shift, independent of politics, but like sort of downstream of politics, maybe. I don't know. Is that something that is that something that you sort of picked up on in your work? Like,
in a way, I don't know. It's tough to speak super broadly about that, because you do think about, I guess there's the Reaganite action hero, but then you have to wonder, it's like, well, okay, so when were Westerns really popular? What did that mean? and Westerns are more or less like right-ish. They're probably reactionary.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I can't just slap that down and be like,
Right.
this is the time where it happened, but you surely get things like 24 that are concerned with terrorism, and there's only one response, and we're gonna get one of the coolest actors. I remember people would vote for Jack Bauer. Like they're like, I would vote for him.
Yeah.
Like he gets the job done. So they set up all these problems which only he can fix, and therefore, oh yeah, that's real life. We would want him. Yeah, there was definitely stuff like that, and it kind of continued to the Obama era in certain ways. Obviously, comedy was very different, but you had shows like Homeland, which would be the sophisticated kind of, we're still against terrorism. But what interested me looking at the footage was the over sexualized aspects of media, particularly commercials, particularly soap commercials, or shampoo commercials, rather. And I do remember Bush being evangelical, kind of Christian right. That was a big part of his appeal, and that was a big part of his base. And then you have pop culture at large tacking the other way and having this weird dialogue with one another. So whereas certain media, such as 24 and all of the other kinds of shows that either didn't make it or weren't as popular, they were kind of following that line, and maybe audiences didn't know they were following that line. And on the flip side, you were getting things that were very sexual, selling you products, and maybe making certain people feel that they were with them in that, where it's like, this guy's really weird about all of his chastity belt stuff. Like, we're going to do, and we can laugh at it. And some of it too was just straight up like misogynist. I think there's a cell phone commercial where someone's like, two women pass by and this guy like takes a photo, like, oh, we have cameras on our phones now, so he's taking photos of his ass while he's like having lunch with his girlfriend. Like this is what was on TV while all this was going on. So that was like a big interest to me, this kind of like weird, sleazy sexual response from corporations, advertisers trying to sell us stuff. Sex sells. And then you have someone in the administration who is vehemently pro-life, traditionally conservative, that kind of thing. Cleaned up his act. He was a drug addict, alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. So that was quite interesting to me. There's less of with the terrorism stuff, it was like really like straight and narrow. There was not much nuance there in terms of media. They kind of helped that along.
Yeah, even the movies that were coming out that were kind of sort of anti-war, but not really, like Syriana, Rendition, Body of Lies, Lions for Lambs. They were still, even if they were like, oh, the war is wrong, they were still like on the side of like the CIA or FBI or NSA person that was, mucking around and making things worse in the Middle East. Even those movies, and Syriana and Body of Lies are probably two of my favorite films from that era. They're still, in retrospect, you're like, yeah, they're the Hollywood equivalent of propaganda, pretty much for the Bush era. Even when they're trying to like, oh, we have a message here, kind of like, war is bad, but we still want you to root for the CIA operative that's, torturing people to get information to stop the bomb going off and, in downtown Beirut or wherever the hell it takes place.
Yeah, I think with that kind of thing too, there's a couple different things happening, which may sound like excuses, but it's like, well, you won't get funding unless you do your story like that. You won't get to use our cool military equipment that the government is giving you unless you do that. Which is, I think there's some website that details literally every movie like that. It's very interesting. And there's a documentary too. And I forget my third point, but it's generally all the same, where it's like we kind of have to do that in order to make the movie, which is a shame. That's like a box they put you in, and you're like, I want to make this type of movie, but I have to do these things in order to get it out. And I think when you view these things, like you said, you love Syriana and there's great stuff in it, and you have to be able to look at something and understand what the filmmaker is doing. And then as a filmmaker, you have these restrictions and these constraints, but you still need to tell the story. So you're like, oh, if I could just do this, I can include all this other stuff. And that's a little bit tougher of a deal when you're not guaranteed that literally anybody will see this. Like, does anybody have the patience and time to look into these things and be like, okay, like I can tell this guy is not into his CIA lead. He's telling me to look elsewhere. But the kind of media language you would need to discern all of that is not readily available for people to use. And like, should they? I don't know. You get into this big question of, I want to make this thing, but I understand the frame I have to work in, these constraints. And then the question is, do you go and do it, or do you just not do it because it's impossible to work under? And I guess in my case, I just spent years and years stealing footage that I'm not allowed to use and using it anyway. And here we are. That was my solution to that.
Yeah, there's definitely in those movies kind of a controlled opposition feeling. Like, again, like in high school, in college, watching those movies, I felt like such a rebel. Like, oh yeah, I'm watching these movies and the government doesn't want me to see it. Type of vibe, like it's like reading a banned book. But now looking back, like, yeah, there's the point's there, but it's buried, and you kind of have to dig around a little bit to find it.
Which could be really fun to do and really like stimulating.
Right. Which I mean, I don't mind. I like watching movies that have a point and you kind of have to think about it. I like going to the movies and thinking, but I'm weird that way. I know I'm probably in a minority of people, definitely the average movie-going audience. But what I find so interesting too about that era is the movie that was kind of almost advertised almost as like a dark comedy, but it wasn't. The movie that kind of made the most point, especially at the end, was Lord of War, like the Nick Cage. And I remember the advertising like, oh, it was a goofy comedy about this gun runner. And that movie actually had a point, and they stuck to the point, and they made the point. And to the end, we're like, oh, by the way, the five biggest countries that supply weapons around the world to warlords and terrorists and stuff are the UK, France, US, Russia, and China. And they're the 5 permanent members of the Security Council of the UN. That's all, folks. Have a nice day. Thanks for coming to see our movie. Bye.
That's all, folks.
That to me is like, okay, that's a pointed stand to take, about that, where it's, Body of Lies and Syriana and stuff, like they don't really stick the landing, as much as, again, when you're, a freshman poli-sci major, like, oh, wow, yeah, stick it to the man. And you're like, going back, like, yeah, that's about as Hollywood and as controlled as it gets.
Yeah, that I think helps when you're able to do, oh, I'm making a movie about the sale of weapons. You could do the same about the drug trade, Afghan poppies, all of these things, the government control of these lines to sell, to gun run, to sell drugs, traffic drugs, that kind of thing. Very, very interesting. And I think people would be into it. There's obviously a lot of drug trafficking movies that are just as garish as the terrorist movies, but you could learn a lot from one that's done very correctly. And I think it helps because it has less of a problem with like good guys, bad guys. So maybe you could make someone kind of enlighten people that way, where it's like, oh yeah, like we're the best country in the world, we're good guys, and we're also involved in the selling of things that are killing people, even though we say, we have the war on drugs, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, but I think it helps because it's like an idea versus the CIA Matt Damon character, George Clooney character, George Clooney, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, the cast in Syriana is stacked. That's what I appreciate lately with President Shinbom of Mexico coming out saying, "Hey, we don't produce the guns or the fentanyl that like our cartels are running. Like that's like where do you guys think you're getting it from? Like and I appreciate a world leader finally kind of saying quiet part out loud that we all kind of know, but she's saying, hey, you're mad at the cartels, but they're being produced in the United States and China, being imported into Mexico, and then being sold back out of Mexico by the cartels. Like, she's like, how come no one else has figured out how this works yet? Like we all know, like, well, why is someone reporting it? But again, that goes back to also the controlled opposition and the media and all that stuff.
And it's interesting because it's like I'm just thinking about all of these movies, and I have two thoughts running through my head. The first one is I keep hearing Brad Pitt say,
I think that's the shit, man. The raw intelligence.
And then the other thing is that it's like, if nothing else, the sort of like aesthetics and like the style of those 2000, like those mid 2000s movies is still enduring. I know Paramount has some show called Lioness coming out, and it's like they're still making like movies with American choppers in the desert. Not American choppers, but like American helicopters.
American choppers in the desert would be a great. I would watch the hell out of that.
Not the Tuttles as operators, but like, and then there's The Old Man, which was an FX series with Jeff Bridges. It was heartbreaking seeing the dude as like a CIA hitman. Like, we're still making this stuff, and it has a very 2000s-ness to it, but it's like as this sort of appendage, it still exists, like independent of, I don't know, like the post 9/11 anxieties and like, like stuff that felt like very Iraq war is still being made, and it feels weird, like it's sort of like outlived its purpose, but it just keeps recreating itself for whatever reason.
I mean, I guess somebody somewhere wants to watch it because it's,
Yeah.
But then again, Yellowstone has like 8 seasons, so who am I?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even, other than Kevin Costner being, I couldn't even tell you a thing about Yellowstone. So I don't.
I watched 2 seasons of Yellowstone. I couldn't tell you anything about it.
I watched. I watched like the first 2 episodes. I was like, I can't.
We were talking about 24 earlier. I actually did watch a full season of 24. There was in college, there was a girl that lived in my dorm that, like, looking back now, I realized she was actually into me, but I was too stupid to realize. She was like, oh, I got all the 24 on DVD. Like, come over to my dorm room and watch it. And I'm like sitting on the floor like a goober. I was not slick with the ladies. In fact, my girlfriend will tell you, she was into me for years until I finally figured, I'm like, oh, you like me more than a friend, huh? So it's my cross to bear. But the only thing I remember from that season of 24 was that a nuke went off in LA. I don't know what season it is. And then like Jack Bauer's boss got like was too close and it was like it wasn't even like a real nuke. It was like a dirty bomb. That's when like everyone's like, dirty bombs are everywhere. And then a dirty bomb goes off in like downtown LA. Not that would have probably changed much. And then Jack Bauer's boss was like too close and like got radiation poisoning and that's all I remember from that show. And I just remember watching it, and I complete took me out, did not suspend my disbelief. I'm like,
yeah,
I think a little more people would have been poisoned, and like that's a bigger environmental issue now. Like they completely skip over like an environmental impact of like a dirty bomb going off in like a major metropolitan area, and that's what I wanted to focus on, and that was not what the show was talking about at all.
24, it's in this like very like rarefied air of TV shows that feels like it was written by 3 12-year-olds in a trench coat. The most recent of which is definitely NBC's La Brea. But yeah, like I definitely think 24 as like a cultural relic, because I did watch, I think maybe like the first 2 seasons not too long ago, and it feels like it's a totally different world, just in terms of like it's insane to think that people fell for this and that it commanded so much of the cultural imagination. And that's the kind of stuff that I look at. I'm doing basically that same kind of thing for the 1950s right now for my research.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen 24, so I just kind of know about it intellectually, just like reading about it and being like, oh wow, that's like sounds messed up. But I do have a mom who just watches Law and Order, Blue Bloods, stuff I've never seen before until I'm like, yeah, I'll watch an episode with you when she comes over. And again, this is all she watches. Chicago Fire, Chicago, whatever, everything. This is it. And it's insane. It is absolutely insane. I've never seen it until like very recently. My wife I've probably seen more than me growing up, but somehow I avoided it. But we were watching this and it really does paint a very specific picture of how things are and how things work. And I think my mom is an extreme case, but I do think, which is weird, this isn't really like a profound thing to say, but it absolutely shapes our worldviews and perspectives. And I know we all know that, but do we know that? Like
And
I think that is not something at the forefront of our mind a ton.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you put it that way because it's like that's kind of like why I focus in on the 1950s is because we create these very segmented, like when we introduce the television into American homes, we create these very segmented media diets and media ecosystems where basically the family, like whereas everybody was going to the movie theaters before, now you have like mostly families and like people moving out to the suburbs. The movie theaters are back downtown, and so everybody's watching TV. And so you have people watching television, which is like trying to keep up with like what was then the Hays Code. And then Hollywood is struggling to stay alive. So they're pushing the boundaries as far as they can. And so you create these very different media diets for people who are just watching TV and getting like their sense of juvenile delinquency from Dragnet versus teenagers who are going to the movie theaters and watching these movies about juvenile delinquency that are giving it like a much more nuanced approach and everything else. And so I really think what's so interesting watching your series is that it is the final days of where we all lived to some extent in the same broader media bubble, where in the sense that like, even though my politics were very different from a lot of the people around me, it's like at the end of the day, we both watched news, somewhere on TV. Like, I mean, I was getting more stuff from the internet certainly than, other people, but it's like there were still, it was the final days of like the monoculture in a sense that 10 years later, it's gone almost entirely. I will confess in the run up to the 2024 election, I did my, vestigial liberal popped out and I did watch The Daily Show a couple of nights,
It's good now though.
Yeah,
right?
just to try to, get that old, scratch that old itch. And I was like, okay, it's good.
Get the band back together
Yeah.
type of.
My God. Talk about the long George W. Bush admin. And I forgot to even bring up campaigning with Liz Cheney.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then Jon Stewart back to make fun of it all. My God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and then I mentioned it to my stepdaughter. I was like, "Oh, I'm watching The Daily Show again," and she had never even heard of it. And she's someone, she's of the generation where they get most of their news from social media, and it's like she had never even heard of The Daily Show. It was this weird disconnect to me because I'm like, oh, I'm going back to that old hobby horse of Comedy Central at 11 o'clock, and it was just like, what the hell are you talking about?
No, I was just gonna say, the only thing I watch on like regular TV anymore is SNL, and just like seeing the commercial of like the NBC bumpers for like other shows that are on NBC right now, and I can't even tell you what's on CBS or ABC anymore, but like I see these commercials for these shows, I'm like, who watches that? Like I'm just like, why? Who? But then I find out like, oh, like they got 8 million viewers on this show last week. And I'm like, wow. And my little Dune show on HBO can't even break, 2 million. And, okay, fine. I guess I understand that Dune's going to be more niche always anyway, but still it's like, yeah, the Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, Chicago EMT, Chicago UPS. And then they have like their, and then my favorite is when they try to do like next week on a special crossover episode, a 4-hour long. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to block out my schedule for that, I guess. But yeah, I'm always amazed over the years as we've all gone more to streaming and online content and things like that, when you do check back into like the terrestrial channels and you're like, oh, they're still making that same kind of show they were making 30 years ago. Awesome. Good to know.
I've never seen a promo for any of the Chicago shows where someone has visible sausage grease on the front of their shirt. So I really have to challenge them on the authenticity.
Yeah, they all look the same. They could just take place wherever. It's like my friend was casting a Disney actor in his new movie. So we all got together and watched the Disney movie, which was supposed to take place in Seattle, just because they said that, but actually shot in, I believe, Canada. So it very much looks like Canada, but they all kind of just look like Disney, like Channel movie town, which is how all of those shows look like. It doesn't have to be in Chicago. It's just all regular hot people. And it's like, okay, but this is in Chicago. They'll have like, I don't know, what does Chicago do again? Deep dish.
Yeah, have the deep bean. Dish. They have disgusting pizza. But yeah, you never see like two guys in like knockoff Ron Harper jerseys like fighting in the street or something like that.
Yeah. There is like a weird, we talk about the death of the monoculture, but there is a weird monoculture and stuff like that contributes to it, where there is no authenticity at all to even the types of actors. Like there used to be more working class actors that would rise up, and now it's just hot rich people for the most part. Some of them are still very nice and, maybe little lefties, and we're happy with that. But that's true. That ends up being this kind of unified vision that you see. And then, we're all on the same 4 websites. Like, so we're not all watching the TV, but we're all generally on the same 4 websites. And yes, still siloed off in different ways. But it's interesting to think of how the monoculture has changed to be, did we smash and spread, or did it kind of evolve into something that doesn't look like a monoculture, but actually is?
The world never stops spinning, and neither do we.
One day, an accurate history of Operation Iraqi Freedom will be written.
Unless we act now and destroy every document in our desks.
The Daily Show with Jon Stewart coming up next on Comedy Central.
How do you envision Miss Me Yet being used? Like, how would you recommend people use it as like a teaching tool? How would you recommend people say, like, I want to use this academically? What advice would you give them?
Well, something I wanted to say, Ryan brought up new Mexican PM, Claudia Scheinbaum, and what she said about drug trafficking and that kind of thing. Imagine if our media spent a day talking about that, what she meant by that, whatever. And I'm a little, I'm assuming that they're all going to talk about it and not just like try and debunk it, whatever. Trying to debunk it for an entire day could be quite interesting on its own. But the point is, they didn't do anything. We didn't really hear about it. It was like a very cool quote, which makes me excited for her. But that's about it.
I saw a couple of people talking about it on Twitter, like a couple like academics and like The Economist and kind of your regular who you expect across the left, right, center spectrum. But it was a very niche, like how many people are following, Tom Nichols and The Economist and Mendy Hassan. Is that his name? There's very few people following like those type of journalists and those type of commentators and those type of academics, even on kind of the Twitter monoculture, which, that's might be the closest thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like some sort of healthy society would talk about that and what that means. And that means people ask politicians about it and they make them answer, not deflect, but actually answer about it. And that would be very interesting to me. And again, maybe it's a bit naive. Like, what would that do? The thing is, I don't know what that would do because we don't do it. Like, we don't talk about these things. And people don't have power to affect any change. They just now have this knowledge where it's like, oh, yeah, why do we give Mexico a hard time when they're not really responsible for that? So for the series, what I think could be interesting is if an entire episode or a section was played, and then there's some discussion on what it means. Like, why were things edited together? Why did this piece follow this piece, follow this piece? And it's not just because they happened in the same year. Like, things are not super chronological. They had to talk to one another and they had to mean something separately and together and that kind of thing. And I think that could be a very interesting discussion because I did have a point of view and that did go into editing it. So I think it could be taught that way. And I think it could be taught, we were talking about the programs that were enacted in the wake of 9/11 that go on today. And we were talking about, you have to go back and talk about before then. We were talking about jihadi fighters in Afghanistan trained by the US. The 9/11 programs were partially created by Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, who were in the Bush admin. They were also in the Reagan admin and Nixon, and that is when they designed it. So we can talk about all of these things again because they're the same people. They're the same people with the same ideas. So there's lots of different ways to use this as a teaching thing. It'd be cool if people did. Let me know if you want to do it and have at it.
So you end because every episode is, as you said, a year. And you always end with these holiday videos that the Bushes put out, or I guess the White House officially put out. And they make some of the Hallmark Christmas movies look like Tarkovsky. What did you see in them? Was it just to torture us? What did you see in those films, sort of like as a PR arm for the White House, or just that these people, I mean, really could not act to save their lives?
I'm very interested in that kind of unreal nature of performance, thinking back to documentary films, particularly even Iranian films that kind of do that. They use a lot of performers who are not professional performers, and sometimes they're even playing themselves or a version of themselves, and the acting is of that purposely. It's not just, oh, he just didn't know how to act. It's like, okay, we're going to use this, and that's going to become another layer of the film. And I don't know if it was like an Obama era time, but Clint Eastwood did something similar where
The Chair.
No. 1517 to Paris, I think is the name of the movie.
Yeah.
These veterans were on a train, they stopped a terrorist attack, so he cast the real people. And
Yes.
they're obviously not traditional actors, but it does have this weird, surreal layer to it. And I'm thinking of these like kind of like cinematic ways in which you can make a film, this particular way to use performance and the aesthetics of documentary filmmaking and reproducing reality, and things feel kind of alien and distanced, like Brechtian distance. And all of a sudden I have these videos of Karl Rove and like very badly acting, trying to be comical, and the filmmaking techniques even are very strange iMovie, like sub iMovie. And it's just, I'm making this insane series again, like piling the contradictions. And it's kind of a blessing to get something like that, where first and foremost, surface level, we're just seeing Bush talking a lot of the time. So it does immediately interest me when there's a zoom or something where it's like, oh my God, there's a camera movement. I have to figure out a way to use that. Or, better yet, if it does something unintentionally now that I put it in, where it's like menacing or something like that, or a Tarkovsky push in suddenly in a Bush speech, where the cameraman was just looking to get B-roll or something. It's like, oh no, that's really cool. So then you're having this kind of production around Christmas where members of the Bush cabinet and staff are joking around to his dog, who they awkwardly wrote a story around. And it really just encapsulates the insanity of everything. And in itself adds a whole new crazy layer. It's just impossible not to use.
And it's like, ostensibly you think, well, they probably were making these, like, thinking that these were for children, because it's all about a dog decorating the White House for Christmas, like, in some form or another. And it's like, did they expect these to be played in schools? Like, were they supposed to go online for, like, kids who learned to go to, like, whitehouse.gov or something? Like, it just is so weird. Like, it has the same kind of feeling as, like, you'll watch, like, riff tracks, look at these, like, kids movies, you like straight to VHS kids movies, where it's like, what the hell is going on?
I just appreciate their commitment to actually having a full story arc. Like like there's an engaging story. If you watch every year, like, oh, Barney makes a friend, Barney gets in trouble. It's actually kind of engaging for the wrong reasons, but it is engaging. For the record, my favorite one is with Karl Rove. I'm very disappointed he did not have a little white dry erase board with him in that, but also, speaking of the cinematography of those Christmas specials or whatever they were for the White House, surprisingly, quite a number of Dutch angles. I was actually surprised that there was like.
That's how you know they're the villains, yeah.
I'm like, wow. I was like, I don't know if they knew what they were doing or not, but hey, Dutch angle, cool.
Yeah, those are weird. Those were on the White House website. Don't know why they do it. Don't know if anybody actually watched them. Nobody seems to know about them. It's like a true discovery for everybody who watches the series now. But yeah, it was a weird thing to do, I guess, because Clinton was such a sleazeball with the Monica Lewinsky thing. And it's like, we're coming in, we're conservative, we're compassionate conservatives, we're doing the traditional family thing. And that was part of it. It was their weird Leave It to Beaver kind of thing, but with Barney the dog. And supposed to be wholesome. But then nobody watched. Like, who even knew about this to watch? It was very, I don't know.
And trying to sell the wholesomeness of the White House to children is a weird choice in and of itself, because it's like, I don't think a 9-year-old in 2002 even knows what the Monica Lewinsky scandal was, let alone try to do a media rehabilitation of like the inner workings of the White House. Like, it's just choices were made, obviously, but none of them. I mean, definitely interesting for like the historical record. That's definitely, archaeologists going to discover it in 1,000 years and wondering what were these people on about.
Yeah.
They should have made it like a regular thing, like releasing your tax returns and your, medical records and stuff. They should have done these with Biden's dogs.
Becomes 24.
Yeah.
I just want to see Commander bite more mid-level bureaucrats. That's just what I'm signing up for, really.
Barney would bite reporters. He would bite all the time. Which is, I don't know if this is like part of the same kind of thing they do with turkey pardons, where it's a goofy little video tradition for the president to do. And then I know that they did a video for Clinton in his last year where it was about him being lonely because Al Gore was on the campaign trail, but then like Hillary was also doing stuff. So it was about Bill being alone in the White House.
That's never
So I don't
good.
know if they were like, yeah, I don't know if they were like, we're gonna get a little silly now, like put these things on the internet, see who finds them.
We all know what happened last time he was alone in the White House for too long.
I know, it was a weird. I mean, whatever. It was their last year. It's like, let people think that. There's a cameo in that too. I'm trying to remember like who it was. Someone has money for Bill Clinton to use the vending machine, and I don't remember who the cameo was. Doesn't matter.
So copyright compliance be damned. Is there one moment, one event, quote, scene from a show, something that you think captures your intent with this series, or just sort of your vision?
Yeah, one shot would be the shoe being thrown at Bush during the press conference. That would be the easiest answer, and likely the truest answer. We'll be here all day if I have to do like sequences. I'll say that one. I do also love, I'll give you two more. I do love him playing basketball with kids. It's like a kid basketball team, and he's there for some reason and he misses every shot. That's really funny to me. And he says air ball. And then him appearing on Deal or No Deal.
Yes, yeah.
To surprise a veteran. Oh my God. Yeah, I think that has a lot of substance to it that you don't have to say. It says everything. Yeah, I would say those three things.
My favorite clip you used during the rehabilitation years was him with Ellen. Like everything, like now everything we know about Ellen DeGeneres too, you're watching, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
That was definitely my reaction watching that. And then I think I even texted Ross that night. Whenever Ross and I have to watch something that neither of us have seen before for an episode, I like to live commentary my reactions to Ross. So
he loves that.
There's a whole other show on the cutting room floor of just Ross and I bantering about watching something for the first time. Very, Mystery Science Theater 3000 style. So, and I remember the Ellen DeGeneres came up and I'm like, along the lines to Ross of, wow, of everything we just watched, that's the most aged poorly clip.
They had a Cowboys game together, and it was like right around the time it came out that Jerry Jones opposed desegregating schools.
They were at a baseball game together, I think.
I lived in Dallas for 7 years, and that sounds pretty much like something Jerry Jones would do.
Yeah, there's also the vote or die clips with Diddy. Which is also another one where it's like, oh, there's a layer there now.
Yeah, there's so many villains. Like, you really could spin this off into like just a series of origin stories for like the sundry villains that have come out of the 2000s.
the vector point to the 2020s.
All right, well, Chris, we're going to say mission accomplished for this one. So we like to end every episode with a film and a book recommendation. The film recommendation, usually our guest is the book recommendation. The film recommendation is Miss Me Yet on Means TV. And then the book, I actually went back and forth a few different times. I was like, do I just recommend Family of Secrets? What do I
Vision points.
I think so. I landed on a book that I read at the time during the Bush years, and that's Al Gore's The Assault on Reason. And the thing that really stuck with me in it was him talking about, I think might have been his first Senate race, and just sort of like the underlying structures of like, someone told him, for every X dollars we spend, we can expect Y increase in polling numbers. And then he says, and so we went with X, and, sure enough, we hit Y. And so just sort of like, he gives this really incisive look at a lot of the ways that policy decisions were sort of like the tail of public opinion, and just sort of like how facts and analysis were sort of secondary to a lot of the ways that things started to work. And I really think that, the book has stayed with me, in some way or another since I read it. And so I think it holds up really. I'm going to revisit it again after talking to this. I don't know if either of you had a book to call out, but That I'm going to go with The Assault on Reason by Al Gore, by President-elect Al Gore.
Sure. I do have a book recommendation. Road to 9/11, Peter Dale Scott touches on all of the things that got us to 9/11.
Yeah,
such
that's
as
a great one.
Yeah, programs made during the Nixon administration that eventually went into effect in 9/11, and arming jihadi fighters such as Osama bin Laden, etc. Very, very good read. And yeah, Miss Me Yet can be seen on Means TV for free. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to give us any money, but I wish you would. Means TV is a worker-owned streaming co-op. I'm on the board of directors. My other film, The Winds That Scatter, is also on there, along with tons of other great things. We are a purveyor of lefty media. We don't take any ad money or anything like that. So every subscription dollar we put back in to the co-op. We have a great bunch of things such as Means Morning News, which we do Tuesday to Friday, which is just a roundup of what's going on in the world. And we have a bunch of different creators that we are poaching from YouTube, who make great kind of essay films about different lefty-centric things. Want to learn about imperialism, about healthcare, about literally anything. We have a ton of stuff like that. So please come check us out. See Means TV, browse. There's other free content. Browse around and sign up if you can.
Awesome. Well, Chris Bell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was a really, really fun show and about a really difficult topic.
So very dark topic.
Yeah, but
well, thanks for having me.
Oh, our
Appreciate
pleasure.
It.
Thank you very much.
We're not a professional operation.
I said that the second you walked away.
I expect this to be in the episode.